really excited to speak with the GNE myopathy community sort of more directly about what we're working on and what we're here to do today. So my name is David Klements, and I'm a representative here from Massachusetts General Hospital, which is one of the entities sort of involved in the running of this study. So the name of the study is NN109, or the 9th NeuroNEXT study, and the abbreviated name is MAGIN, because a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled multi-center study to evaluate the efficacy of ManNAc in subjects with GNE myopathy is too much to say every time we want to talk about it. So that's what we're going with. I think Marianne had a similar slide in her presentation here, but this is just to give a little bit more background about who the different folks involved in the running of this study are, and sort of how we're all involved in this. So the funding for this grant comes primarily from a grant through the NIH. And actually one thing that I learned fairly recently when I started working on this study was that the I in NIH stands for institutes, as in there are many institutes at the NIH which are all focused on different specific areas of research and treatment. And so we have 3 of those institutes. I think there are around 21, if I recall correctly, in total. 3 of them are involved in this study. So the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, which is the primary institute funding the NeuroNEXT network. The NIAMS, which is the Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, they're also providing funding for this study. And the NHGRI, or the National Human Genome Research Institute. That is where Dr. Carrillo and Dr. Huizing are based out of. And they are providing a lot of these sort of oversight and research behind this study to get us going. And then, of course, Leadiant is very heavily involved in this study as well. They've been great to work with, so it was nice meeting Nancy in person here today. They are providing the medication that we're testing in this study, as well as additional oversight and expertise in testing of medications in general. And so that brings us to NeuroNEXT and sort of what is it? Because Mass General Hospital, which is where I'm from, is not actually any of these other places. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the NeuroNEXT network and what that is and how we're involved in this. So NeuroNEXT is the Network for Excellence in Neuroscience Clinical Trials. Our website's up here as well. And this network was funded by NINDS at the NIH in 2011. So the idea is to basically have this standing network in place, which will make studying new neurological disorders and treatments for those disorders make it more efficient and faster to get up and running. So we basically have a standing infrastructure in place for how we can get these studies going. So the Clinical Coordinating Center is based at Massachusetts General Hospital, which is where I'm from. And that is in charge of sort of general oversight, coordinating the study, making sure all of the different people involved are talking to each other and coordinating well and everything is running smoothly. The Data Coordinating Center, who we work very closely with as well, is based out of the University of Iowa, and they are there to essentially, they created all of our electronic infrastructure, the databases that we use. They're in charge of collecting and monitoring all of the data which is collected on all of our studies and keeping it in a central database. They also provide oversight to make sure all of the study sites we work with are running well, and provide statistical and analysis expertise as well. And then we have 25 clinical study sites, which is sort of where the rubber hits the road for these studies, where we bring in patients with, in the case of this study, GNE myopathy. In the other studies we've worked on, the other illnesses and disorders which have been studied there as well. And that's where we have our physician experts and coordinators who meet with subjects and actually perform the study as that is generating all the results that we're hoping to collect. So the network was just renewed for an additional several years of funding in 2018, which we're very excited about. And again, this is just sort of our general mission statement. to expand the NIH's capability to respond quickly as new opportunities arise to test promising therapies for people with neurological disorders, to test promising new therapies, and to increase efficiency of clinical trials. So that's sort of our goal for what we're trying to achieve with these studies that we do. And this is sort of a map to give you an idea of where all NeuroNEXT is located. So as I mentioned, we've got the 2 coordinating centers, which are at the University of Iowa and Massachusetts General Hospital. And then our 25 study sites are spread out throughout the United States so that we can try and get a representative sample across the country for these studies when we conduct them, and also make it practical to get as many people involved as we can so that we're sort of spread out as much as we can throughout the country. And then for this study, we are going to be working at 10 of these 25 sites throughout the US. So I've updated the map here. So these are the 10 sites where we will be enrolling patients to participate in the MAGIN study as we get up and running. So I'll run through these really quickly. We'll be recruiting subjects to participate at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, the universities of Utah, Kansas, Iowa, Washington University in St. Louis, Ohio State University, University of Rochester, Columbia University, and then Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and the NIH Clinical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. So those are the 10 places where we will be enrolling participants to work with us on this study as we're moving that forward. And so then just a little bit more information about the coordinating groups. So the CCC at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, we manage the clinical trial operations for these studies. And the DCC at the University of Iowa provides statistical and data management operations and remote and on-site data monitoring for all of our funded studies. So now you all know what NeuroNEXT is, which is very exciting. And hopefully that explains a little bit of how all of these different organizations sort of get together to try and conduct this study efficiently. So now I'm going to speak a little bit more about the NN109, the MAGIN study specifically. So these are the 2 big brains behind this study, so to speak. So Dr. Carrillo is based out of the NHGRI at National Institutes of Health. And she is, has done a lot of the research on ManNAc so far and is an expert in GNE myopathy. And Dr. Anthony Amato is the vice chairman of neurology at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He's also professor at Harvard Medical School, so he is a very smart guy as well. And they are both very involved in the oversight and the running of these studies. I talk to them very often, and they're very hands-on to make sure we're getting this up and running and testing the ManNAc medication as soon as we can. So I included a couple slides here on background to sort of contextualize this and get us to where we are now with the 109 study. I'm not going to go too in-depth into this, though, just because Dr. Huysing spoke about this a little bit more in her presentation, and she is more of a ManNAc expert than I am. So, but this was the first study in humans on ManNAc. And as she mentioned, it demonstrated essentially that the drug seemed to be safe for a single dose and seemed to increase the production of sialic acid, which for GNE myopathy specifically is a good indicator that there might be something there as far as a treatment. So, and then, as she mentioned, the phase 2 study was recently wrapped up, and the results of that are going to be presented in 2 days by Dr. Carrillo at this AAN meeting, and will be published and publicly available soon thereafter. And I know that she is also planning to have a webinar sometime over the summer where patients will be able to tune in and speak to her about the results from that trial and ask any questions that you may have for her at that time. So I'm sure information will be going out about that once it's scheduled, and hopefully anyone who's interested is able to join us for that. So these 2 trials that have been done so far essentially showed that ManNAc seems to be safe, and there are indicators that look like it is a promising treatment potentially for GNE myopathy. So we're very excited about these results, and what we're trying to accomplish now is to basically just get more data and show more definitively how well this medication works and exactly how safe it is. Dr. Huizing was talking a little bit about outcomes and what we're trying to achieve exactly with trials. So that is essentially what are the specific things we're looking at to see how well all of this is working. So two words that we'll often be talking about in clinical research are the safety and efficacy of any given medication. Safety is an obvious one. Does it cause any problems for people who are taking the drug? Efficacy is basically just the scientific word for how well is this working and is it accomplishing what we need it to. So our primary objective for the MAGIN study is to evaluate the efficacy of ManNAc in subjects with GNA myopathy to see if we're able to observe any slowing in the progression of muscle decline in people who are taking the active drug compared to the placebo. So that is our main goal, and we're going to be measuring that using something called QMA, or Quantitative Muscle Assessment, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And then we are also, of course, keeping a close eye on safety, determining how well the drug is tolerated and if it poses any risks for safety. So far, everything that we've seen seems very good. As Marianne mentioned, the largest side effects that we saw were some gastrointestinal sort of issues with the drug that was being taken in the earlier phase studies. We're hoping that we'll be able to minimize that a little bit more in this study. Part of the issue there seemed to be that with the 6 grams taken twice a day, not all of it was being absorbed, which seemed to be causing some GI issues. So for this study, instead of 6 grams twice a day, we're doing 4 grams 3 times a day. So that's 1 more dose per day, but in a smaller amount, so that hopefully more of the drug gets absorbed into the system and is therefore better tolerated. So we're hopeful for that as well. And then the exploratory objective here is just sort of, additional things we're curious about beyond the primary goals of the study. So we're also trying to just take a look at the effect of ManNAc on physical function and activities of daily lives in people who are taking it as compared to people taking placebo at the same rate. So that's, like Marianne was mentioning, things like ability to tie shoes and just like general quality of life and things like that, just measurable everyday things to see if we can see any improvement based on that. And so this is just, again, some basic overview of how the trial is going to be set up. So it's randomized, so participants and their treating doctors will not know whether they are taking the active drug or the placebo. And the dose is going to be 4 grams 3 times a day. The placebo, which is used in this study, is going to be erythritol, which is a sugar-like substance, which looks and tastes pretty much the same as the ManNAc. And so we will be enrolling 51 subjects to participate. We're hoping that enrollment will begin sometime later this year. We're just working through sort of the startup phase and getting all the pieces in place now. And it's in a 2-to-1 ratio, which means 2/3 of those 51 people will be receiving the active ManNAc, and 1/3 will be receiving placebo. So I think that's 17 subjects on placebo and 34 on the active drug. You can check my math on that. I might be off. I'm sorry. And then we'll be following up with patients every few months throughout the course of the study. So at 3 months, 6 months, and then every 6 months after that until everybody on the study has been followed for at least 24 months or 2 years. So that's sort of a general overview of how the dosing and the follow-up on the study goes. And this is just a sort of schematic diagram of that as well. So things that we'll be checking at these follow-up visits. We'll be starting with a screening visit just to have patients come in and confirm that they're eligible and meet all the requirements of the study and wouldn't, have any difficulties or issues with participating in the study. And so that involves safety labs, blood and urine samples, the QMA, which I'll talk a little bit more which is how we're primarily measuring muscle strength. Functional measures just to test other sorts of things as far as like how well you're performing normal everyday tasks in your life. Some PROs, which are patient-reported outcomes, basically questionnaires, which we'll be asking to get at the same things. And then all of the visits will also just be asking for any adverse events if you've had any sort of health issues or other problems which have come up, so that we'll be tracking that throughout the study as well. So all of those things are basically going to be done at each of the in-person visits. So that happens at the screening visit. For patients who are eligible based on screening, you'll be brought back within a month to do the baseline visit, where you will start taking either the active study drug or the placebo. And then there's a phone call check-in at 3 months and additional follow-up visits every 6 months after that throughout the course of the study. So that's generally how it's set up. So this is the QMA. So as I mentioned, this is the primary measure that we are testing with all of our participants to be able to quantify and sort of apply specific numbers to muscle strength and how that changes over the course of the study. With 2 years of follow-up, we are hoping that we'll be able to, see a measurable difference between patients who are taking the active drug and patients who are on the placebo arm, so that we can see how that progresses during the study. And so we'll be measuring a few different muscle groups. So this picture here is, I believe, testing the hip strength of the hip muscles. And some of these phrases are a little bit beyond me because I'm not a physical therapist, but we will be just testing for strength in hand grip, in the wrists, in the shoulders and elbows, as well as the hips, the knees, and foot or ankle muscle strength. So those are all the different muscle groups which we'll be tracking over the course of the study, using this sort of machine to just see how well patients are progressing with muscle strength in a measurable way. So that is the QMA. So that will be our primary thing we're looking at as far as trying to determine how well the drug is working, the efficacy, to see if that has an impact on muscle strength over time. And as I mentioned, we'll also be testing for safety, asking everybody who participates whether they've had any adverse events or health issues, taking blood and urine tests, vital signs, and just a general physical examination at each of the follow-up visits. And the functional measures that we'll be testing throughout the study to see how well general function is going is a myopathy assessment tool, a test to see how well you're able to walk, get up and get out of a chair, a forward reach test, and a hand function test, as well as assorted questionnaires that'll be trying to get at measuring these things as well. And so the idea is, if we're testing all of these things every 6 months over a span of a few years, hopefully we can see how the illness is progressing in people who are participating in the study. So that is sort of a general overview of what this MAGIN study is going to look like, sort of how we'll be conducting it at those 10 sites across the United States. And then I just wanted to put this slide up there as well for referrals, or if there's any other information that you would like to get about this study. So Dr. Hoising mentioned Kenan Bradley, the clinical research coordinator at NIH, who works with her, as well as Dr. Carrillo. She's great. And she is the person to reach out to if you are potentially interested in participating in this study. She can take your information and help arrange the best way to do that. And then I did also just want to, make sure this information was out there. One of the main requirements for participation will be positive genetic testing confirming the presence of GNE myopathy. Just because, The method of action of this drug is increasing sialic acid, which is something specific to GNE myopathy and not other myopathies necessarily. So in order to make sure this is working, we just need to make sure everybody has that genetic testing confirmation. If you have already had that and are interested in participating, you can reach out to Kennen. If you are interested in obtaining genetic testing to confirm the presence of GNE myopathy, you can also reach out to her, and she can discuss options for how to do that and any potential avenues which we might have available to help you get that testing so that by the time we're up and running, and we're hoping to start enrollment on this study later this year, all of that will be in place and ready to go. So I think that is it. I sort of ran through all of that really quickly, so thanks for listening
Thank you
to me.
so much, David. A round of applause. That's wonderful. We do have some questions for you, and I will get to you. I see some hands going up.
Great.
But we have one from a patient who's watching with the live streaming, Lee Canning. And she wants to know, for the 2019 study, will there be any Canadian locations? Are there any plans for Canadian studies? I'm assuming since this is the NIH, it's the nation of United States. Right?
That is true. We are a little bit limited in just funding and infrastructure for where we're able to conduct this study specifically. So just those 10 sites throughout the U.S. I mentioned earlier are the only locations we'll be able to have participants attend and participate. But it is possible we might be able to arrange some assistance for transportation if the person is able and willing to travel to one of those locations. I don't want to make any promises because I'm not sure exactly how much funding we have available for that, but that is another thing where could reach out to Kennen and just say, I'm interested. Is this a possibility?
Right. Well, so just a quick announcement. Number one, Kennen, everybody here knows, she's a friend of NDF's and she's been to many of our events. She's really wonderful person to reach out to, but with this kind of question. But I just wanted to add to what you said, that I think that NDF might be able to also support some travel scholarships. Potentially, I'd have to run this by my board, but if they're particularly interesting patients and they have a compelling genetic story that we might want to explore, and obviously we defer to you guys, but we may be able to also offer assistance. So if they're in Canada on the, I don't know where you are, Lee, but if you are on the east coast of Canada, I would imagine it's not that hard to get to Bethesda.
Sure.
On the west coast. Where did you say you were?
UCLA is our main center on the west coast.
So, but we'll talk about this later. So we had another question over here from Ultragenics. Hold on one second.
So is biomarker part of your clinical trial evaluation?
Biomarkers?
Yeah.
I know that we are doing some pharmacokinetic testing that's planned as part of the study as well. I'm not 100% sure on the specifics, just as I'm more of the I guess, operational side of the study rather than the scientific expertise, but that I think we have some biomarker information incorporated into the protocol.
That's great. And this is so exciting. This is actually happening, you guys. Are there any other questions for David Klements? If not, we very much thank you, David. We have one more question, and then we'll let you go, I promise.
Okay.
Hi, David.
Hi.
Question about patients on placebo. As part of the trial, will they be switched over to the drug maybe at the end of the study or halfway through the study?
There is a plan that is currently being developed where we hope to be able to offer active drug to patients at the end of the study. It's unfortunate that we have to do it this way, but the placebo is really essential, as I'm sure you all know, to tracking the progress of the actual drug. But we certainly don't want to deprive anybody of the opportunity. So I believe And I don't know if this is finalized, but I think I've heard talk with Leadiant of potentially looking into ways to provide drug to patients after the end of the trial, although I don't know specifically what form that's going to take right now.
So if I understand you correctly, it's possible that Leadiant could provide the drug earlier than everyone else to everyone else that was on the placebo. Is that right, Nancy Parsons? Do you not know? It's in
Yeah.
discussion, so hopefully that's something that
So,
can happen.
yeah, I don't want to make any promises on
Right,
behalf of
of course.
Leadiant, so I'm sorry, but I know it's being discussed.
Yeah, and I know that that's a question we have often in a lot of different trials. So if there are no other questions for David Klements, please let's thank him for being here today. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.